You said when you raised equity just last week, I think it was, that you wanted to have the money to be able to add flights should the pandemic depress airport costs and plane prices. You said that last week. Is it really about that, or is it about shoring up the balance sheet to get through what could be a really difficult winter?
Well, first, there's no question that this winter is going to be very difficult. We have a seat sale going today, 50% off most of our flights for the months of travel in the months of September, October, and November. Fares as little as $9.99. I think what we were conscious of, though, was shoring up the balance sheet or strengthening the balance sheet in advance. We have two big debt repayments in the middle of 2021. We have to repay a $600 million loan to the UK government, and we have our first 2016 bond of $850 million. So I think when we return to shareholders the bond market this year, put in place the refinancings of both of those debt instruments, and that removes, if you like, any kind of cash call on the airline for the next 2 years. Well, our next bond isn't due for repayment until 2023. That leaves us very strongly positioned. We have $3.5 billion in cash now to engage in slashing prices, maintaining reasonably strong customer demand on those flights and those routes where we can operate this winter. It's very challenging because European governments, most notably the British, keep chopping and changing coronavirus restrictions at a time when many other European countries, the Germans and the Italies, have been managing much lower COVID rates, but allowing international travel as long as it's following the ECDC and the EASA health and safety guidelines.
Yeah, why do you think that is, Michael? I mean, when I woke up and saw that the British government wanted to now restrict gatherings down to 6 again, I just thought, from a Berlin perspective, since the lockdown, the easing has been constant and we've had no turning back. And the UK response seems so choppy: open, closed, go to school, don't, back to work, maybe stay home. Why this indecision in London?
I think it's largely political mismanagement. I mean, there's a focus in London and in Dublin here on a daily COVID case rate that's largely irrelevant when it's not transferring into large hospital numbers. ICUs are essentially empty. I mean, I think they're monitoring the wrong number. What they should be doing is we should have a daily announcement of how many tests you've done. It should be test and trace is the way we deal with this without disrupting our daily lives. The UK and the Irish governments are not providing adequate test and trace processes. The Germans and the Italians are much more effective. I mean, the Italians are testing people on arrival at airports, and the UK government and the Irish are still not doing this. So I think there's a large degree of political mismanagement. I think the politicians getting bounced around by this daily COVID case numbers without drilling down into the detail. The original plan with COVID was to flatten the curve so the hospitals will cope. The hospitals can cope at the moment. Most of them are empty in Ireland and the UK, and yet politicians are bouncing around, making these very broad brush measures on restrictions. I mean, they restricted travel to Spain during most of August. They included the Canaries and the Balearic Islands, who had almost no COVID cases there. So it's a very blunt instrument. It's a very defective instrument. And I think we need much more mandatory face mask wearing in private and public settings and much more effective test and tracing.
They have, of course, from the UK perspective at least, that the response is now more regional and very island-based when it comes to travel restrictions, which I know you know. Michael, what about the lobbying that the aviation industry has been doing to try and get more testing at airports? Are you still trying to do more of that in Europe, or have you lost that battle? Because the UK response, the government's response, has often been that it's difficult because you test people, but then a day later they might show the symptoms. If you tested them again, it had just been hidden on the day you tested. Is that battle still to be fought, or have you lost that one?
I think it's a battle we'll ultimately win. It's just that, making the case for testing at airports, testing again 3 days, 5 days, 7 days later is still the best way. It's not going to give you 100% effectiveness, but it will give you 99% effectiveness. I mean, we were criticised when we went back flying in July, calling for mandatory face masks. And at a time, a lot of these medical experts were rubbishing the effectiveness of face masks. 3 months later, everybody is, including the WHO, are recommending mandatory face masks. So in a large number of cases, we have these experts and politicians are not only mismanaging, but failing to read the signals correctly. I mean, more testing is what's needed. Certainly within the European Union context, there should be free movement within the European Union and the UK, within those countries. I think we'd be much more concerned about long-haul travel from places like India and Brazil and the US. But if you look across Europe, the COVID case rates are reasonably low. Yes, they have ticked up in recent weeks, but they're not resulting this time in huge hospital admissions. The hospitals are not being overrun, and nor are the ICUs. So we need a much more effective strategy that is not about locking down whole countries. By all means, I mean, the British are great. They will lock down their own internal regions. But when it comes to other countries, they then lock down entire countries. It's not sophisticated. And I think what is the real challenge is once we get to kind of September and October, the schools go back, we need business people to start moving again. And they can't move. You can't begin to resume business travel if you've got 14-day quarantines left, right and centre, or even worse, the threat that a 14-day quarantine could be imposed at 24 hours notice. It's not the way forward. By all means, do more testing. People, I think, and customers, passengers would be willing to submit to testing before they travel or on arrival. And that's the most effective way we can get back to some normal, rational economic activity while still combating the spread of the COVID virus.
And of course, everyone wants to get to that place. Right now, Michael, when I talk to older people, they are determined not to travel. I noticed that younger people have an easier time doing that. Do your customers, do your passengers skew younger?
And funnily enough, we've seen no reluctance among, say, our elderly passengers to travel. I think they're very conscious. We have extensive health and safety procedures. There's mandatory mask wearing at the airport, on board the aircraft. There's very little interaction with the cabin crew. All the transactions on board are contactless. And there are still lots of people who are traveling, mainly for family reasons. They have, have christenings, weddings, deaths, funerals, that kind of thing. So they are traveling. I think there's a degree of nervousness there. And that's what we need governments to address. We need more confidence-building measures. We need, for example, the British government to stop this kind of stupid 24 hours notice restrictions and upweight testing. We also need the government's got to come up with some measures here to give the airlines and the airline industry a break this winter. The industry's been calling, for example, for the rollback of the APD taxes, 15 and 20 euros pounds a ticket. They should be withdrawn for 12 months. We've got to be able to get used price to get people back flying again, particularly this winter, because without the airlines and without the flights, your tourism industry collapses, business travel collapses. The world cannot succeed, on Zoom calls. We've got to get back to doing work, and we've got to get back to selling stuff, which is what we in the European economy do best.
Okay. Michael, can I ask you just briefly about pay? You've been negotiating, of course, pay cuts for some staff, trying to lose fewer of them, I suppose, which is a good thing. But as you've been doing that, and you've been tapping into the UK government's COVID corporate financing facility, the CCFF, has it been increasingly difficult to justify executive pay and bonuses at Ryanair?
No, I don't think so. And firstly, I've taken a 50% pay cut last year and another 50% cut in my basic pay this year. So I'm down to 25% of what I was earning 2 years ago. My bonus this year was reduced by 50%. These are still large numbers, but I think we have led from the front. Certainly in Ryanair, myself and the senior management team have taken deeper pay cuts and bigger reductions in bonuses than any request we've made of our pilots, our cabin crew. We've largely completed pay deals with the pilots, which involve about a 20% of pay cuts for the captains, down to about 10% for the cabin crew, and I've taken a 50% pay cut. So we're leading from the front, and I don't expect there'll be any kickback. Yeah, the proxy firms will be out there whinging about it, but none of the proxy firms have taken the kind of pay cuts I have over the last 2 years. So frankly, I don't pay too much attention to them.